Well, sorry. We were just catching, the good news is you didn't miss anything super substantive. We were just catching up on what happened at the select board when Larry and I went there with the grant application and whatnot. The long and short is the grant application's been submitted, and all the work we did on those 4 categories, they didn't take any action on it because we're going to go back, definitely Larry, are going to go back and talk them through everything. So they understand all the changes we made, and then it's going to come back in front of the select board. So that's the sort of short version of what we were talking about for 10 minutes, but that's the important bit.
Sounds good.
Okay, that takes us to the natural resource inventory. Do you want to take over?
Sure. Okay, so a long time ago, it seems like, February, we were talking about the results of the natural resource inventory that the folks who were involved in that project put together with help from Arrowwood Environmental. And there were a number of possible courses of action that were discussed at the end of that presentation, and we haven't acted on any of them at this stage. And so I thought, since we are entered into kind of the next round of land use reg amendments, we should consider some of the possibilities that were discussed at that time. And they fall into different groups. There were, I think, I don't know, like 8 or 10 or 12 different natural resource types that were identified through the inventory. And there were kind of 2 versions of this is my summary, which is a little shorter. I put it up on the screen. Let me share the screen. So my version of this chart, which is what we're looking at now, took the various types of habitat that were identified in the inventory and talked about where they're currently referenced in our land use reg, which sections, and then what are the restrictions summarized that are in place now, and then what are possible additional restrictions that we could consider. And these are, I think, all things that could be done through one tool that's in our toolbox, which is to update the land use regs accordingly. There are other tools in the toolbox, and we'll get to those later. But if we were going to change the land use regs, what would be the type of change that we could envision? Rare, threatened, and endangered species, we could simply add that to the subdivision rules, basically. And we could say that if you're subdividing land for building lots, you have to consider and avoid impact on rare, threatened, and endangered species habitat. That'd be a pretty simple thing.
Oh, input on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think there should be any concerns about rare species. The state of Vermont does not require that rare species be protected. Mm-hmm. There are hundreds of so-called rare species in Vermont, mm-hmm. and they're just rare by virtue of being out of their normal habitat.
Right.
They're thriving outside the state.
Yes.
So I think we should remove rare
yes.
from that,
okay.
and put in just the threatened and endangered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anyone feel differently about the word rare?
I have no opinion.
Yeah,
I don't know what a rare. I don't. With the rare species,
I have this printout.
Specific examples of rare species.
Okay, I'll give you an example of a rare species. Fairly well known, or maybe not. Okay, there's yellow oak. This is a rare species. So if it shows up in Vermont and you want to protect it, well, is it really a rare species in regards to its habitat in war land here? This is where yellow pine inhabits in the country. Right. All right. Up in Vermont, it's rare up here. This isn't its normal habitat. Right. So you want to protect it in Vermont, basically? That doesn't make any sense, and the state of Vermont doesn't say protect it. So if we want to protect rare species, that's what's opening the door to a whole lot of cancellations of development activity. You have to just stop everything. You're going to protect rare species.
That's a good point. My only comment is, I'm not an expert, and I literally just Googled this, David, but Vermont Fish and Wildlife, it's unclear to me how they use the word rare. I think we just need to confirm.
I think
they
that
seem to use it almost interchangeably with extinction in what I'm looking at.
No, look,
yeah,
you're saying,
that's what I was going to ask. What's the distinction between rare and endangered?
I don't know. Like it says explanation of legal status, and the number one thing is very rare, which says at very, but then it defines very rare as at very high risk of extinction. So it's using rare and, well, I'm not sure. I'm not arguing for keeping it, David. It seems to me they're using these words very interchangeably.
Threatened and endangered is a much more serious category. That handles species that should be protected, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But the rare, they're just in Vermont because this isn't their normal habitat.
Right, and in David's example, it's not like yellow pine is at any risk of going away from our country's forests. I mean, it's very widespread and extremely prolific, especially in the central and southeast parts of the country. And so I agree with David. I feel like the focus should be on threatened and endangered species.
Mm-hmm.
And the good news is that there are, in the Vermont Natural Resources Atlas, it's really easy to call up that layer in the atlas and then drill down to a specific property, and it will show you where there are zones where the threatened and endangered species live. And so the point here would not be an absolute prohibition on building on a lot that has some areas of it which are hosting these threatened and endangered species. The point would be to know where that habitat is on a lot and work and have the DRB encourage or require the landowner to not drop their house right in the middle of habitat that does host a threatened species. That's all. It's to cultivate an awareness and make that a factor in DRB review for subdivision specifically.
Well, it looks like
if you look at this list, they only categorize threatened and endangered. They don't have rares.
well, I found what it.
No, they're all rare.
So it says
they do have threatened and endangered in there, and there are very few of them, actually.
Well, species can be
That's why you
rare
don't see 'em.
for one of four reasons. They can have very particular habitat requirements, be at the edge of their range, be vulnerable to disturbance or collection, or have difficulty reproducing. And then there's a whole law that protects threatened or endangered animals that it refers to. So I don't know if that's something we need to, we clearly need to defer to the state law and what our DRB is doing, right?
Yeah, if this whole list is rare,
It's not.
they got goldenrod, black-eyed
No, I
peas.
don't disagree with David at all.
No,
I
yeah,
just
yeah,
try to understand the way that it works.
And
Right.
goldenrod in there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, goldenrod clearly
Only that were rare.
Yeah, goldenrod doesn't.
Harry climbs poison ivy, like, who cares? Like, does anyone really want to protect poison ivy, any form of it? I mean,
Yeah, I can't pretend to understand how this works.
Yeah.
So this was put together by a consultant, and the state must have definitions.
They do.
So why don't we just defer to the state?
Yeah, let's reference the state statute.
That's fine. Yeah, exactly. That would be the way to do it.
Okay.
So we could just refer to Vermont's endangered species laws.
Yeah, and then, it's just a matter of opening up the Natural Resources Atlas and looking what's there. A lot of lots will not have any of those types of species at all. And the ones that do, the atlas is actually really good about this. It shows like a big red bullseye, on the part of your land that does provide habitat for threatened and endangered species. And so it's like, oh, stay away from that area and you're good.
Discussing prohibited anything within that area. I don't know. These are just calculated areas. I don't know what the standards are, which sets that perimeter and everything.
Yeah.
And there are properties there that are going to be affected.
Sure.
Basically. So I would say advisory and not prohibited.
Okay.
So if you were to hire an engineer to come and do your subdivision work for you, they would have to look at the state regulations to see, like they do with wetlands.
Yeah, exactly. It's like looking at a wetlands map.
So you would have
Where
to
is
call
it?
an expert.
Where is it on the property? You don't necessarily have to call an expert. You just have to look at the state mapping and say, you know, where is the area that the property owner should avoid when they're choosing where to build? And then to make sure the DRB has that information going in when they're doing a subdivision.
But we have nothing in our bylaws now
No.
for this,
No.
and so there's nothing to enforce.
Right.
Like, it can never be an issue.
So an area that is actually delineated as a red spot or something would have to have somebody come in and actually say, well, this area, part of that red spot is free of these, and so we don't worry about moving there.
It could be. I mean, I wouldn't want to impose unnecessary burdens on property owners, and I want to make it just, it's like a checklist, you know, it's like, is that an issue on this property? Yes, no, if yes, then where is it? And you know, just as you say, advisory to just steer clear of it as possible. So it's very, very similar to a wetlands, you know, wetlands mapping. It's like, if you have an area in your property that could be or probably is wetlands, easier to just avoid it if you can, if you have other land that you can build on. And frankly, you don't want to build there anyway, right? So.
And most people just follow an advisory.
Yeah. Okay, so next one is wetlands. We have 100-foot and 50-foot minimum buffers for Class 1 and Class 2 wetlands. I don't think we have any Class 1 wetlands in Underhill. So the 50-foot buffer is pretty standard now, and it's the same as in state statute, 50-foot buffer from wetlands. And if you're going to encroach on a wetland buffer, you have to go get a permit from A&R. So I think my recommendation is no additional protections are needed. We already have a call out in 3.19. It does carve out an exception for wetland crossings and encroachments that earn an A&R permit. So if you're encroaching on a wetland or crossing a wetland and you go to A&R and they do their due diligence, they look into it and they say, well, you know, for this little driveway, yeah, you can cross the corner of the wetland buffer. Then we just take that as okay. Because we don't have the expertise that A&R does, and we shouldn't be second guessing them. So my sense is stand pat in our regulations on that. Forested riparian, same issue. It's a buffer around streams. Now, Arrowwood did in their survey propose a smaller buffer from the top of the bank for unnamed streams in forest riparian zones. But this is the same issue as above. My view is that there's no additional protections needed, and that 12.5 feet from the top of the bank. I mean, we haven't yet grappled with whether our take on the top of the bank is even accurate. You know, we're going to fix that chart in the land use regs of 3.1 because it's not clear. And Jeff, by the way, did some great background work on that and made some recommendations to us, so we haven't taken them up yet. So I think for now, maybe we just put that aside until we have a better grasp on being able to explain to folks what is the top of the bank, you know, what is the floodplain, because right now our definitions for those things aren't clear. So I don't think we should change the 50-foot standard for forested riparian areas, which is to say streams that flow through forests.
Is that the state statute as well? The final word on?
Yeah, I mean, stream banks and buffers there's one set of standards in the state for those. It doesn't matter whether it's in a forest or not.
How far back do you have to be under the state rules, do you know?
It's the 50-foot.
Oh, it's the 50-foot.
Yeah. Yeah, some towns have a bigger buffer for some streams and rivers.
I thought it was 100 foot.
It's 100 feet for some things. I don't remember.
Is that for named?
I think there are named streams. Yeah, the Browns River, I think, has a 100-foot buffer.
Yeah. So that doesn't, what you're saying there doesn't affect those?
No, that would not change, unless we change it. So we keep it 100 feet for the named streams that it's called out in the land use regs, and then for unnamed streams, which can be quite small. I mean, you could be talking about a lot of like tiny little drainages that are dry during dry times in the summer and only have water in them part of the year.
Ephemeral
so it's a different-
drainages are what they're called. Ephemeral?
Yes, ephemeral streets, yeah. Next category is S1, S2, and S3 upland natural communities. And I feel like my recommendation is no additional protection because our land use regs, except for telecom facilities, say that any development structures are prohibited over 1,500 feet in elevation. And that's all of these upland communities. They're all over 1,500 feet. Many of the ones that are called in the Arrowhead study are like 2,000, 2,500 feet and up. So, you know, these are areas where, except for telecom towers, you can't build any already. So I feel like that's probably sufficient protection. I mean, no one's going to build a road up into that elevated area if they can't build a structure, unless you're going in to take out logs. And logging is exempt anyway. So to me, it's kind of annoying.
Okay.
Next one is a little more interesting. So the wildlife connectivity. So my recommendation is that we require the DRB to consider known wildlife habitat crossings when they're doing subdivision approvals, and encourage long-term protection of these resources as open space. So this is kind of a two-part thing. One is knowing where the habitat crossings are. The state has beefed up or is beefing up the mapping of those on the A&R maps, because previously it was sort of based on more local observation, like, oh, I've seen the deer crossing at this spot in the road, or, you know, seen, you know, bobcat, or, you know, seen beavers building dams in that area, and they do cross the road because the beaver activities are both sides of the road, or what have you. So part one is knowing where they are, and that is available or will be available soon at a high level of detail through the A&R maps. And then the second piece would be when the DRB is doing a subdivision review, often subdivisions are carving up land into housing lots. They're trying to cluster the development on one part of a larger parcel. And so one of the things that has to be decided is say, okay, well, if we're going to allow waivers for lot sizes and driveway widths and whatever else that the landowner is asking for in terms of flexibility, then we can require the landowner to set aside X% of their land as permanently protected open space. So then the question is, where on the lot do you protect the open space? And it seems to me that looking at wildlife connectivity is an opportunity to focus for open space protection on places where we know there's wildlife habitat and connectivity. Because big picture, the trend in the world of conservation is to zoom out and look at areas where there's a lot of habitat for certain kinds of species. So an example that affects Underhill is that, you know, our upland forest going up to the slopes of Mount Mansfield is contiguous with upland forest in neighboring towns up and down the spine of the Green Mountains. So Bolton to the south, Cambridge to the north, you know, further south, Waterbury and into Duxbury. I mean, these are all large, very large tracts of upland forest. And it's from the critters' perspective, it's really important that they be able to proceed unimpeded throughout, you know, the block. And there are animals like bears and bobcats that coy dogs that are now roaming pretty large areas of forest habitat. And so our call would be to be mindful of those and make sure that when we're choosing areas to protect, that we keep in mind not just what's on a particular piece of property, but also nearby it, and so that we can try to foster the creation of larger uninterrupted habitat blocks where we know the critters are moving freely through the forest, because critters don't care about property lines, right? And if so, you know, you might, for example, in a subdivision say, okay, well, you can carve up this 40 acres into 4 housing lots or 5 housing lots, but you can insert a condition that the landowner can't put a fence across a known wildlife corridor. Just leave it open. You know, if you want to put a fence around your garden, that's fine. Keep the deer out, but don't, you know, fence the boundary of it if we know that this is an area where animals are likely to pass based on A&R. Forget off my soapbox. I think we can just reference the A&R documented wildlife corridors in the subdivision regs, and then encourage landowners to focus open space protections for those parts of their land that are more valuable for protecting wildlife habitat. Makes sense. Vernal pools, my take is that there's, we could specify buffers around those, but again, it's a little more challenging because most vernal pools are not class 1 or class 2 wetlands. They're class 3, which means they're seasonal in nature. So at dry times of year, they dry up. Mm-hmm. And then in wet times of year, they're there, but they come and go based on the conditions on the land. So I think it feels sketchy to try to create a buffer around them, even though that's what the inventory suggested. Because if they're wetlands at all, they're class 3 wetlands, and the last 3 wetlands are not regulated by the state and not regulated by the town currently.
How do people feel?
So this would be not regulated.
Yes.
Not regulated.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think most vernal pools are in less populated parts of town.
Right.
Yeah. And the ones that are in populated parts of town that are near houses and roads, it's just a little hard because, you know, they've been there on and off for years and they're known, and, you know, probably most property owners are not going to build, but some property owners have already filled them in a long time ago and built on them, and we can't do anything about that. So.
Anyone else? Okay.
Okay, rivers and streams, similar to the woodland streams, woodland riparian. That's 100 feet from the top of bank and 15 feet from the top of the slope. We already have that in the land use regs. I'm not recommending additional protection. And we already talked about lands above 1,500 feet elevation. And by the way, you know, there's that exception for telecom projects about 1,500 feet. We already have a clause in the land use regs that says the Conservation Commission can weigh in on those telecom projects at high elevation, and I just like let them do their jobs.
So that 100, I think the state says 50 feet
for
setbacks from main streams.
Yeah, we have a higher standard of protection for a small number of names. 100 feet.
Yeah, I think we're more restricted than the state.
Right. So we're already
changing.
Yeah, we're already more restricted than the state.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah. Okay, early successional, and all the next categories are all in the study from Arrowwood. They were considered to be secondary conservation resources, meaning lower priority than the first set of issues. So just take all the rest with a grain of salt. So early successional habitats, these are edge areas between forested lands and open lands like fields or meadows. We don't restrict under state law. We don't restrict those under land use regs. We don't restrict those. Mostly, they're close to existing roads, and they're places where you know, fields that are overgrowing into what the state calls persistent shrubland habitat. And I don't really see a benefit to enacting additional protections for that because, you know, for the most part, these are areas that are in transition biologically. You know, if we enacted a specific restriction with very careful definitions in 10 or 15 years, the land would look really different because the shrubland habitat will only grow into young forest, and then in another 20 or 30 years, it would be established forest. And it seems kind of silly for us to be putting a stake in the ground and saying, oh, it's this, and only to know that it's in the process of evolving into something else. Mast stands. So these are like literally tall, straight trees that once upon a time were very prized because they were made into ship's masts for sailing ships. And these are things that occur naturally in mature upland forests. They're located typically on slopes that are greater than 15% grade. Those are graded areas, sloped areas are already subject to restrictions on development. Basically, you can't build without DRB approval on any slope that's greater than 15%. And if it's greater than a 25% slope, you can't build, period. So I'm not sure that it really makes sense to have additional protection on that. The only exception being that we can't restrict forestry, traditional uses of forestry, and utility lines and towers and trails and agriculture that already exist in those areas. So we're talking about, again, you know, these are things that are already restricted in our land use regs.
Well, we don't, in a mass area, you'd be able to do some logging.
Yes.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, and if T-Mobile or Verizon were going in to put up a new cell tower up on the side of a ridge, then, you know, they would, because that gets into an area that's regulated by the feds and by the state, we don't really have much of a say in that except for the details of how that gets built. So they, you know, the bottom line is that telecom companies do have a right to go in and cut down trees and to put in access roads and to build a tower. If they put in for a certificate of public good for the state, then they get approved. Not to say that those projects aren't controversial when they happen, but sometimes towns fight those. But most of the time, those fights go nowhere.
What was Arrowhead recommending with it?
I have to look at what they said.
I think there is a spot over on the Twin Hill or somewhere around there with some oak mast stands.
Here. Underhill zoning has no protections now, and in the end, yeah, they mapped them, but they didn't say anything about protecting them, apparently.
Looking at their thing, it says maintain and protect the functional integrity of all mast stands in the town or areas of interest.
Yeah, so you see on this map that's up on the screen now, can't build on it anyway. I don't think we need any additional protection. S4 and 5 natural communities, most of the land area of town with a wide variety of features and values. I mean, I think it's, you know, these together add up to 96% of the land area of Underhill. So I don't think it's practical to talk about protecting those things. I'll confess I don't remember what S4 and 5 are.
General everything.
Yeah, everything else basically. All the above. Here we go. Yeah, so you can see it on the indicated areas indicated in green on the map. It's most of chapter. Right, and then that brings us to the last item, of enlarged buffers around vernal pools. I think we kind of talked about this already, actually. So,
I have a bigger picture question, Mary, which I think I'm missing. So I wasn't involved. I knew the natural resource inventory was happening, obviously, but I was not. It feels like, I just want to make sure we're not doing this, I guess. We're not really making any changes based on it. We're doing like one thing. Do you think we're ignoring the natural resources inventory?
no, I don't.
That they do?
Well, so there's different approaches. So one approach is a very restrictive approach,
Yeah.
which is in Charlotte, the town decided in its wisdom to basically carve out all of the riparian areas and all of the class 2 wetlands and all of or a significant part of the lakeshore as a conservation zone. So there was a whole set of rules associated with, really, they amounted to significant restrictions to building anything in the conservation zone. Now, I found it a little ironic, I don't know if that's the right word, but you know, if you think about how historic development occurred in most towns in Vermont, it was very common for people to build houses right on this, you know, the bank of the river, right, or the bank of near the lakeshore. And so by enacting blanket restriction on building anything in the quote conservation zone, unquote, you're making it really difficult for people to do anything other than just to replace a structure within the footprint that it's already in. But you know, the idea of like, it becomes virtually impossible, for example, to add an ADU if it says you can't build any new structures for people to live in if you're in the conservation zone. So I didn't really understand that because it seemed like it was so draconian. It's sort of like you're treating everything in the conservation zone as like if it were in a flood hazard zone. You know, like no bill, period, except under very stringent exceptions. Whereas, you know, other towns have enacted a natural resource overlay district. So those are, you know, designed to enact limited set of restrictions on certain kinds of development. And they're usually done with an eye towards protecting certain types of habitat. I think Elmore has done that, and Jericho has done that. And so the natural resource overlay means that so you have your underlying zoning district, like, you know, for us it might be the rural residential district along Route 15, for example. And that has a very clear set of standards and rules for what you can build. And then you have the overlay district that sits on top of parts of that district. And it says, you know, for example, once you get a certain number of like hundreds of feet back from the road, and you get it, you know, an area that rises up into the woods, then you can have additional restrictions that apply to that part. And so it's a more fine-tuned, it's not a blunt instrument, it's a more fine-tuned way of approaching it. And you can draw the boundaries of that overlay district based on what you want to protect. An example would be, and this is not a great example for natural resources, but so familiar with the part of Charlotte, as you headed south of Route 7 and you come up to the village of Shelburne, you climb up that big hill and pass the Shelburne Museum, and like another mile or two, you cross the town line into Charlotte as you continue south. Well, Route 7 climbs up at that point, and it really opens up the views to the Adirondacks to the east and the Green Mountains, the Adirondacks to the west and Green Mountains to the east. And there's, you know, beautiful open landscapes and agricultural land. And the town designated everything from near the top of that hill all the way down into the cut where you would go to turn off to go to the village as a scenic overlay district. And they said that within that corridor, Route 7 corridor, you have to set new structures further back from the road. You can't use reflective materials, make big glass walls, for example, on the sides of buildings that are facing it. And you have to use exterior finishes and colors that are not jarring to the eye. So, you know, their focus is, hey, we got to, you know, knockout views in this part of town, and you want to make sure that any structure, any building that goes up is respectful of people's ability to appreciate and enjoy the scenery. It's an overlay district, so it sits on top of the underlying zoning for that part of town, which is mostly agricultural.
And I think in South Burlington, they actually, in order to protect the view, required the landowners to cut the vegetation to a certain level, not allowing it to grow over 3 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that enforced.
Yeah, right.
For Charlotte to institute these regulations, and what sort of process was it with the town? Was there long pushback, or were people on board with that philosophy?
It's before my time, but I think there was people who were on board. Yeah, and the other thing that's there's, the nuance of peculiarities. Like, for example, Route 7 is a federal state aid highway, and so it has a much bigger setback requirement than the other roads in town. So instead of a 50-foot setback from the road, it's like 75 feet from the edge of the right of way, which for a highway like Route 7 is a wide right of way. So people were basically couldn't build anything within 100 or 125 feet of the road anyway. So I mean that reinforced the idea of a view protection corridor, because the last thing you want if you want people to enjoy the view is to have tall buildings right up next to the road, right? Because that's blocking. Yeah. But yeah, in general, I think it's a better tool, and there's a couple of examples. I may have shared one of them where you can, and it's something that you do when you're changing your town plan, because the zoning district map, which would include overlay district, is considered a change to the town plan. So it's a somewhat more involved process than just changing the land use regs. The whole town has to vote on it, basically.
So you would recommend, to the extent there's anything in this that we wanted to implement, that it be largely done through overlay districts, which would not be a thing we're talking about now, that would be part of the mapping process. Is that's okay.
No, but to answer your further question, your earlier question, Brian,
Yeah.
about the Natural Resources Committee
Yeah.
being upset maybe by what we're doing.
Oh, I just didn't want their work to go to waste.
Andy, I think, agreed to the idea that the Natural Resources overlay could be advisory. I think she came to that opinion in the end. If it's advisory, I
Right.
can't see it could be any problem at all.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So can I just get some clarity from you, Larry? So kind of on your topic of wetlands, forested riparian. So in here, in your current restriction for wetlands, it says minimum disturbance driveways, 100 feet, 50 feet, blah, blah, blah. And then forested riparian, you say same as above. So our current restrictions it specifically dedicates forested riparian in that same category? Because I'm not seeing where it says that in our regs, like the term forested riparian. Like, do we have to specifically say it so that it's categorized in there, or am I just missing it?
I don't think our regs, I think you're right, I don't think our regs call out forested riparian in a separate category.
So like, in order to say same as above, do we need to like somehow insert that word, like verbiage, either in like the definitions or in that same section where it talks about wetlands, just throw in the word and forested riparian? Yes, maybe. Okay, I'm just trying to.
Something about the wetlands and the rivers and streams combined.
Yeah, I went to definitions of wetland. I looked it up, like it doesn't say that in there. It mentions most of the other things, but then there's no specific forested riparian or riparian in any more of the definitions. So that's why I'm just trying to make sure, like, if we're going to on this paper say same as above, then we have to actually like use that word verbiage so people know like that's what we're talking about.
Yep. I mean, I think it's fair to say the Arrowwood study felt like it was appropriate to call out forested riparian as a separate sort of ecological zone and a potential category for protection. And I'm not familiar with the science on this, but I mean, I think it has to do with the unique species that exist in a forested riparian zone as opposed to just a stream bank in the middle of a.
So we just need to say something like forested riparian areas have similar restrictions to our section blah 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 for wetlands or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Just so that somebody can kind of
That makes sense.
We're back to that. That's just my thought.
You, on the wetland map, or the riparian zones are marked, right? On the area along
Yeah,
the
in
river.
general, yeah. So you have the riparian zones are clearly marked on the A&R map, and then there's, you can also add a layer of what's called aquatic habitat. So that's generally what you're saying, like it's the area close to the streams that is friendly for critters that, you know, live in that zone in between the stream itself and the banks of the stream.
So if on the overlay, the wetlands is like this,
Yeah.
and then there's like riparian like this,
Yes.
so then does the setback start at this outermost riparian overlay to be 50 to 100 feet, or is it back to the class 2 or 1 wetland? So then there is a kind of a, like, how do you enforce that? Or,
Isn't it defined from the edge of the stream, 100 feet?
well, this just says, it just says, well, on this, I don't know, I haven't read it clear. It just says, sets 100 to 50 foot minimum buffers for class 1 and class 2 wetlands. So a wetland doesn't have like a top of slope, like wetlands could just be, like this table is a wetland. So the map says this edge is the edge of the wetlands.
Mhm.
So from here, you have to be 100 feet back.
Yeah.
But if there's a riparian in here, then like, does that 100 feet start at this line back, or does it still go back to wetlands and back? Like, do we have to clarify that?
It may need clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're playing with the A&R map and you're just looking at the actual stream location, that's clearly shown as, you know, blue lines on that map, right? But then if you then add the aquatic habitat layer on top of that, you'll see that the location of the stream is surrounded on both sides by this cross hatch green line. And in some cases, it's a fairly narrow zone. In other cases, it's pretty wide. You know, and some of that is because, you know, with rivers that meander over the course of their flow over the course of a year through the seasons, it does change, right? You know, some areas in high water times, you know, the areas that are affected by that, and therefore our aquatic habitats are much larger, and in dry times of the year, shrink. But, you know, the state maps show the maximum extent of the aquatic habitat in times that are wet. And so, you know, they do vary. And of course, the course of the streams themselves vary over time. You know, one of the most impactful workshops I ever went to was at the A&R, I went to a workshop on how streams, and this is shortly after Tropical Storm Irene, how streams change over time. And it showed 3 images of the Gold Brook watershed in Stowe, or at 10-year intervals. It was amazing how different it was over 10-year spans. It's like 1 year it's like whoop, 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 and then next year it's like whoop, 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 and then 10 years later it's completely different. And that's, you know, partly by design in terms of human impact, because, you know, wisely the town protected both sides of the watershed and let the floodplains be so that the stream could meander. You know, when we freak out after a flooding event and riprap the banks of streams, we prevent that kind of natural movement of the streams over time. But then we lose the ability to let the stream do its thing, and we lose the value of the floodplain.
Yeah.
So, you know, we should be cautious about not allowing development anywhere within the floodplains, because the stream bank, the location of the stream will change over time, and that's a good thing. It's a natural thing, and you can't prevent it.
Well, we're getting 100-year storm events every year.
That's right.
Somewhere. So,
So those 2 things that Jeff flagged go on the work list?
Yeah.
Okay.
So look into, can you rephrase that?
So 1, I guess, how we define riparian, forested riparian, and how it relates to wetlands, and then how we, I guess, clarify the setback if they're like kind of, you know, stair step on each other, right?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking because like my neighbor up the road, he has A&R come out to define the wetlands, so they put the little pink tags everywhere, right? So from that, you can kind of say like, oh, okay, so I got to be 100 feet from this pink tag.
Right.
But they don't really tag the forested riparian. I think they just tag the class 1 or class 2 wetlands. So if there is on the overlay map some other additional forested riparian overlay, do we do we care about that, or do we need to consider it?
Okay, got it. Any other thoughts about different approaches here? I did post a document that I think talks about various tools for open space protection. So this is, whoops, out of memory.
Is this the overlay district thing you sent around?
Yeah. Oh, memory comes up.
Is that your computer, or are you saving too many videos of your band on there or something?
Okay. So this was kind of an overview from a state land use planning manual that explains some of the different options for how you protect natural resources. And so it talks in here about zoning district standards, talks about different types of development review, talks about whether the restrictions are specific to, say, subdivisions, or whether they apply to things like site plan review or conditional use, regardless of what zoning district it's in. It also talks about making a distinction between being strict about protecting natural resources within a growth center, like a village or a downtown, versus more rural parts of town. Talked about resource protection districts, which are a form of overlay district. So you can protect specific types of resources, such as farming, forestry, recreation, mining, and quarrying. You can, and talks about setbacks and buffers and building envelopes, which limit where you can build. We use building envelopes and buffers in subdivisions. We use buffers throughout town, and setbacks in every district. Here's where it talks about overlay zoning or critical area zoning for specific purposes. One of these tools, which is very widely used all across the country, is watershed protection. So sometimes if you're driving down a road, you'll see entering the such and such watershed. And so that's an example of, within that watershed, if it's an important drinking water source for a community system, they can be very strict about what you can and cannot do within that watershed zone, protection zone. And, I was just in the DC area in Maryland, and it was interesting to see, to hike on trails that went around ponds that were completely blocked from people swimming or boating in them, because they're used for managing water supply for community water systems. And so they don't want any bodies coming in contact with that water. You can look at it, but you can't touch. And that's an example of watershed protection. And then there's surface water, wetland, and shoreland districts. So Charlotte had a shoreland district all along the lakeshore for Lake Champlain, and had different standards that apply to protecting the shoreland zone that were more strict than the standards in other parts of town. So those are that's the toolbox. And one of my next steps, if we sort of like this general approach, is to think about what other towns have enacted for overlay zoning, and think about, can we cut and paste language from their rules into our rules, and also think about are there parts of town that really deserve specific protection with overlay districts.
Does that sound good to everyone?
Generally speaking, I'm not in favor of overlay districts. Like our regulations, explains things in a restricted fashion enough, basically. When you come in with an overlay, it says, oh, no, that doesn't matter. You can do, we'll bring in the second overlay. Oh, no, you can't do anything there either. But then you bring in the third overlay.
It does complicate things a lot.
Yeah, I just thought to stay away from that sort of thing. Keep things as simple as possible. And we've got a whole lot of regulatory prohibitions in our zoning regs already. And I don't think they're really that necessary, with the fact that we have 3, 5, 10, and 15 acre zoning now to each one, which already provides a whole lot of protection.
How do other people feel?
I don't know, it gets complicated, probably more than we can chew, but.
Tim?
Well, Harold gave us a lot of recommendations, right, as far as things to consider, so either consider them or not consider them, but
Did they have overlay districts that they suggested?
I don't think they suggested how to deal with it, they just kind of outlined where they thought,
Yeah.
what could actually be possible there, where we should focus.
Anyone else? Bart?
You know, we really wouldn't need overlay if development had to make reference to the wildlife resources and natural resources. And if you've already looked at that, then you can tell what kind of problems you might have from the kind of development being proposed.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was preparing background packets for the DRB in Sherlock, mostly for subdivision projects, always started with the A&R map. And I turned on as many layers as my computer's memory could handle without crashing. So I could see, you know, and this particular piece of land, like, what are the issues? So I looked at wetlands, I looked at wildlife habitat, I looked at slopes, and, you know, I started my written findings or analysis there because, you know, you need to know what's on the land. Because the landowner may or may not be aware of those things, but the DRB needs to understand, like, what are the issues on a particular piece of land, whether it's wetlands or shoreline, lakeshore shoreline, or slopes or what have you. And that can then should drive a thoughtful decision process about what kind of buildings can be permitted on what's left. Because, you know, if you have parts of the land that, you know, really should be off limits because of wetlands or riparian or, you know, intense old growth forests or whatever, then what's left is, you know, where it's logical for development to go. And that's, you know, not necessarily the DRB like putting down the hammer and saying you can't build there. Sometimes it's a process of working things out with the landowner because they have their ideal location where they want to put their house. But then, you know, taking into account what we can find out easily from the A&R mapping about the resources that are there, we can say, well, you know, this is some old growth forest, or this is valuable wildlife connectivity habitat. Maybe instead of putting it tucked in the woods, you could bring it out to the edge of the woods and therefore not interfere with the habitat, and you get better views that way and a shorter driveway. So, you know, I think part of the dance of doing good land use permitting work is that you try to offer information to the property owner and, you know, let them have a say about, you know, taking their original idea about what they want to do. And then if they're flexible about where they still get to build their house, but maybe in a slightly different place on the land than what they had hoped for, but then they can get their permit and have a more seamless process with the DRB to get the approvals, or through the zoning administrator if it's just a permit. So, you know, try to be collaborative is what we always try to do. You know, not put the hammer down and say you can't do that, although there were sometimes that we had to say, you know, no, you can't build in the wetland. But more typically it's, here's what we learned when we looked at the land, and is there a way for you to carry out your vision for this that doesn't impinge on these resources? And in most cases, the answer is yes.
Larry, do we have, I don't know, like a place on our website with like useful links and have that stuff posted already?
We don't.
Or is that something we maybe should, or like even like at the beginning of our regs, just kind of have like a helpful tool section and just like post a bunch of hyperlinks that if somebody references online, they can just click it real quick.
Yep.
Because finding that stuff's hard. I mean, I know it's going to update and it's not going to, you know, where you need a 404 error at some point, but I think it's easy enough to like clean that up every 6 months or something. but still have it, because what you're saying makes total sense.
Yeah.
But how many people know to even look at it if it's not staring them in the face?
Jen and today, just 'cause I don't want to ignore you because you're online. Do you have any thoughts on any of this stuff? Whether we should be thinking about overlay districts, not thinking about overlay districts, sort of comfort with the whole list we went through? Or are you good with where we are?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the discussion. I think it's definitely good and important to be considering natural resources at this level. But hearing David and Bart both say or offer some kind of hesitancy about the overcomplicating things, I worry about that too. But perhaps there's a way we can. Oh, sorry, I'm getting. Build it into the existing zoning districts we have in town, but feel as though I might need more time to come out on that. But hearing David say that made me think, yeah, well, maybe it is something we should, that could just lead to over-regulating and too many restrictions and over-getting it a bit. But that's kind of my first impressions about it. Yeah.
Okay. Jen?
I think I think having had to deal with buffer zones between wetlands and stuff like that, I tend to think that it's a bit overregulated as well. I understand the necessity of trying to protect you know, our waterways and stuff like that, but I tend to agree that it might be a bit overregulated as well.
Okay, thank you.
And just from a practical experience, and just being a builder, having a town where there's less regulations, it's left more to your judgment and realizing the bigger picture and being responsible and making the right decision as opposed to having it regulated. And then be on the other side, we had a project that was Delaware Act 250 just for a single family lot, which sounds like that would be more like having these overlay districts. You have to move things around, just much more rigid, and you have to go through a lot more review, and it definitely adds to the expense and the time and the bureaucracy of it in a way that I think for somebody who's thoughtful and conscientious, it may not be necessary. It's kind of more protecting the outlier who's not going to really care about the result as much and be less respectful of the land and the big picture.
So I guess I was just wondering, I mean, in general, I feel like we have all of these regulations, we probably don't need anything more, but from Larry's example, we're protecting, you know, a view that's part of the town that's important to the town. So I'm just wondering, I mean, you mentioned these overlays. Was there anything in particular in Underhill that you felt like needed an overlay?
Well, you know, we already have the zoning for the Mount Mansfield, what's it called?
Scenic preservation.
Scenic preservation, yeah. So there's definitely that thinking is baked into the regs because the standards are different in that Pleasant Valley, basically along Pleasant Valley Road, right? And they should be. It's really a spectacular resource for the town, and, you know, and it's, you know, potentially it has economic value for the town to continue to protect that resource. You know, the question would be how much more stringent do we want to be, and what are the resources and then the natural communities that are similarly important to the future of the town. You know, because often with natural resources, you know, it's like you don't know what you got till it's gone, right? Paraphrasing Larry Mitchell's song. And so, you know, we're called upon to be really thoughtful about, you know, for the town to continue to have wide open spaces that house many different types of wildlife and you know, forest and vegetation types, you know, and also, you know, have watersheds that work how they're supposed to and don't flood out residential zones. what do we specifically need to be more mindful of and protecting for the future? That's what we're really talking about here.
Yeah.
Because the immediate economic value of those natural resources is not apparent to people in their day-to-day.
My main concern, not to use a specific property, and I don't know how it filters through this, is this bigger picture like that. The project on Pleasant Valley, where the guy wanted to build a crazy driveway going up really high, and the town said no, and he sued the town, and now he's selling it. Like, the one thing is, like, Underhill's getting wealthier, just is.
Yeah.
And, like, I think there's things we can't think of right now, where someone is going to come in and be like, yeah, I'm going to drop a $400,000 driveway in here, and I'm going to plow right to the top of that sucker. And I don't care how much it costs. And I just want to make I don't know how that relates to all this, but I think there's things like the people sitting around this table can't imagine doing, where if you have enough money, you're just like, yeah, I don't care. Do it.
I think the original owner did come in with that sort of a proposition, and he was shot down, period.
He was, but
And then he was sold to a secondary buyer who tried to remodel the place, and now it's for sale again.
yeah, I just think maybe that person didn't have enough money to actually envision to play the fight out, right? But like, you know, that's the main thing that I worry about someday when it comes to steep slopes or whatever. Like, you know, the scenarios where you just have really deep pockets and like,
Yeah.
we haven't thought to regulate.
Right.
Well, that's right there, with the steep slopes.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. No, that might be a bad example, but that's what always comes to mind.
Yeah, no, it's actually a really good example, not just for the town regs, but also for the state. So, you know, they just have this new Act 181 set of rules that are coming out, and the last step in Act 181 implementation is what they call the Tier 3 designation. And the Tier 3 is like away from towns, away from developed areas, in areas that are rich in natural resources and relatively undeveloped or completely undeveloped. So one of the triggers for being considered as a Tier 3 project is that you have a driveway on a certain length. And that's a recognition of the fact that if you're cutting a new driveway up into a completely undeveloped area, particularly if it's forested habitat, higher elevation, you're going to trigger some more stringent rules than if it's just like you're building a house next to an existing road. So, you know, I think the state feels the same way, that there are lands that, because they've been relatively undeveloped or are undeveloped completely, they want to make sure that anybody, regardless of how much money they have to follow a stricter standard than somebody who just buys a housing lot or a town road and just wants to build a single-family dwelling next to the road, next to the driveway. So, I mean, this is all, I think, in full alignment with that thinking.
Okay. Well, it sounds like everyone's pretty much on the same page. Anything else on this, Larry? I know we're super far behind and we have one more agenda item. Maybe you can intro and then we'll talk about it next meeting again.
Yeah, that's fine.
To 7:18. So.
Yes. All right. So I'll pass around. I posted this fairly late. I posted it on Tuesday. But what I tried to do was to give everybody some point-by-point responses to the things that we talked about with respect to Act 47 and Act 181 changes to the land use regs a couple meetings ago in early October, and then the pro-housing amendments that we discussed, I think, at the most recent meeting. And there were some of those that people said, we're fine, you know, this makes sense, let's just do it as proposed here. And then there were other things that people thought needed more discussion and therefore tabled. So what I tried to do here was to pull out the ones that people tabled, that we tabled, sorry, and to give people a better sense of, you know, why I thought this is still a good idea, or what could change to make it a little more palatable. And I think the hardest one here, the very first one, the allowing more than one principal use or structure on a lot. David, I think, had particularly strong concerns about that, so I tried to, you know, give kind of why I still think this is important in terms of other restrictions on developing properties for multiple structures. And then the last one on page 2 was complicated. So this was specifying a maximum residential density, which is distinct from the minimum lot size of village zoning districts. And so these changes were only in the villages that I proposed, and that, really putting in a different standard altogether. So we don't right now have a minimum lot area for each dwelling unit, and like Charlotte had them for every zoning district, minimum lot size for each dwelling unit. It's based on minimum lot area, period, to create a new lot within the zoning district. That's what we have now. And so Brandy Saxton in the housing study was recommending sort of tweaking that for just the villages and saying, let's have a maximum residential density, because that allows us to control the scale of development in the villages where people would be most concerned about having too much housing crowded into too small of an area. So this goes back to and related to the one above that, which we talked about loosening up a little bit the maximum number of units that could go for multifamily projects in the flats and in the Underhill Center. So we kept it static for the flats at maximum 5 units, and then in the Underhill Center we changed it from 3 to 5 units. In both cases we said this would be permitted use, so it wouldn't have to go through conditional use and site plan review. And this last item here is related to that, because it again creates an upward restriction on how many units per acre. So if you have a small lot in the village districts, you can have no more than 6 dwellings, no matter what else is happening there on that lot. And 6 dwellings per acre of land area in the lot. And in Underhill Center would be a maximum of 4 dwellings per acre. So what this essentially prevents is having big blocks of apartments on relatively smallish lots. You could still, if you had a larger lot in either village, you could still build out to these maximum densities. So I tried to explain it. It's worth a little more thought. It actually is probably even worth doing some scenarios. So like maybe we just, the next time we talk about this, we can pull up on the town map, let's find a larger lot within the village. Say, how many acres is this? How many units could go into that lot, given our current zoning units? And how would that be different if we made these changes in the village?
That would be super. I'll just speak for myself. That would be super helpful for me, because apparently I am the dumbest person in the planning commission, and this thing in particular makes my head hurt. And I'm going through a couple of scenarios. Would make me feel a lot smarter about it.
Yeah, and I feel like just sort of politically in the real world, when the rubber hits the road and the actual projects come forward, let's say septic is not an issue because whoever's doing this is going to build or the septic themselves. I think the thing that tends to create the most friction around projects that involve multifamily housing is, if someone's in a home in a neighborhood that's dominated by single-family dwellings, and suddenly somebody wants to take a larger lot and then want to put up a 4-plex or a 6-plex, it's like people, their objection is often to the density and the number of new residents that are going to be living on what many people in the neighborhood perceive as mostly single-family dwellings. And so, by enacting hard limits on how dense you can build housing in the villages, I think you kind of maybe steer clear of some of that kind of friction, because you can assure residents in established neighborhoods that there is a hard stop, there's an upper limit on how many multifamily units can be built on a given piece of land. Because we don't really have that now.
But this is really not applicable from a septic. So is it, you know what I mean?
It may not be. Yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we were to present this to the select board, they might be, what is that, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is forward-thinking stuff, right? This is thinking about, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road. If that happens and it becomes much more financially feasible to put in multifamily housing within the flats district, then, what's to prevent, and this goes back to David's point on the first issue on page 1, what's to prevent a whole bunch of units from going in on a piece of land, and people probably want some reassurance around that. want to know what the limits are,
Yeah.
because they have an idea of what the village should look like and how much housing and people can be concentrated in an already developed area. So, this sets some parameters.
But I mean, to Roy's point from the last meeting too, like it is kind of cart before the horse. Like if it's not feasible for 10 years, why not just look at it in 10 years again when it's practical versus writing a bunch of stuff that won't
Whatever be used.
Yeah.
Well, how about if, I'm not trying to cut people off, but I sort of am. How about, because I feel like this is a longer discussion.
Oh, yeah.
How about if we move it to the next meeting just from a time perspective? Is everyone good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions on what Larry put out that you need to ask tonight to help you think about it for the next meeting?
Okay. Maybe everybody should familiarize themselves with the parcel finder and then you can go online and look at their flats and see that there are probably two lots that are over 1 acre or something like that.
Yeah.
So you can get an idea in your mind before we get together again to what the possibilities are for all of that. And, seems pretty limited to me, but have to look closer.
That's the kind of excellent long-term strategic suggestion like a chair of the planning commission might suggest. Just saying. Anything else?
I just want to mention, I think exactly was a really good comment that you made online.
Oh, yeah.
Some good.
Yeah. All about housing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured some of this might kick off a larger discussion about what we want in terms of that. Jeff sent a big email about his views on housing, and Larry replied and Jeff replied.
Yeah.
No,
I don't think I missed any replies.
That discussion?
What?
Is this what drove that discussion?
No.
Just the past months of housing discussion.
Yeah, Jeff was mostly, I think, focused on, the state has set these very ambitious housing targets, right? 40,000 units for the whole state over the next 25 years, I think, something like that. 8,000 units a year, and over the next 5 years. And, Jeff was questioning the assumptions behind those projections, and sort of trying to break down, well, here's where the data came from, and is this reliable data? And, are the targets really on point, or are they exaggerated? Because if they're exaggerated, then we should not be preparing all of these regulatory changes and creating all these incentives to build housing for a market that may not even actually be there.
Because how quickly is Vermont growing population?
It's not growing.
Yeah.
It decreased last year.
Yeah. So I don't get it.
Well, I think what the state tries not to put in the headline is that if you build a bunch of housing units, then you'll drive down housing prices and make housing more affordable. But that's not a great sales pitch because no one wants their house value to decline. So that's a big part of the thing, right? Like to drive prices down, you have to increase supply.
One of the important things that mentioned was the infrastructure that isn't going to get built. Basically, you'll end up with the development and doesn't support it.
Lots of fodder for next meeting. Sorry, Larry, I didn't mean to.
No. Your email address.
So we have a couple of sets of minutes.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you, Larry. Let me pull those up. We have to approve the minutes, and then we'll wrap the meeting up. Let me flip back. Sorry.
Starting with the October 2nd.
Yeah, I was trying to get the name. And I just got to pop these open. We have such a large group here tonight that
We have a quorum. That was part of.
Yeah, okay. Does someone want to make a motion? Well, I'm sorry. Did anyone have any questions or comments on the October 2nd minutes? No. Does someone want to make a motion to approve the October 2nd minutes? Bart? Second?
Sure.
David? All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Okay, and does anyone have any questions or comments on the October 16th minutes? Does someone want to make a motion to approve the October 16th minutes? Jeff?
Yeah, I'll approve it.
Is there a second, Tim? Oh, sorry, Roy?
I was here.
Roy seconds, all in favor?
I didn't think about
Aye.
it.
All right, okay, it's unanimous. All right, well, thank you, everyone. David, is there any motion that you've been considering?
Make a motion. Go home.
I will second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Sorry for the audio meeting, Jen.
Thanks for sorting that. No worries. Yeah. Bye-bye.